What's going on, everybody? Thank you for joining me on another episode of The Art and the Artist. I'm here today with Saun Santipreecha. Thank you, Sean, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I had the pleasure of seeing Sean's show. We are actually in the gallery that his show is in. As you can see the fantastic artwork behind us. But let's get to know Sean a little bit. All right, let's start from the beginning then. Mm-hmm. Where are you from and where are you currently located?
I'm from Thailand originally, and I'm currently located here in LA.
Okay, now the move to LA originally, was that for art or was that for music?
It was for music, film, yeah.
Okay, so Saun is actually an accomplished musician as well as a fantastic artist. So we'll get into more of that for a little bit. So I want to talk about the music first before we get into the art, since that's what originally brought you here to LA. So what sort of music were you doing? And is that what you were studying in Thailand?
Well, I grew up first in visual art and then transitioned into music when I was around 7. Okay. And did classical piano, and then was part of an opera company for a while. And then, I grew up, like a lot of us, grew up watching films and was interested in filmmaking, and thought I wanted to be a filmmaker. Okay. But because of my music background, I ended up scoring a lot of films for friends. Okay. And that's what led me here to LA originally, was to explore that. Oh, okay.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, so then you get here for music. Mm-hmm. Now, at this time, are you still making art? Or are you strictly just, focusing on music at the time?
No, at the time I kind of stopped. Okay. Kind of doing the visual art. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so then what brought you back to visual arts and what made that happen?
Well, because I've been here for almost 15 years now, and it's been a long journey of trying to find a place that feels like home. Sure. And I tried to write a book for 5 years. Okay. I've done different things. Yeah. But it actually was through a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a wonderful filmmaker, who pointed out that the way I have always talked about music is very visual. Oh, sure. For example, there are many colors visually that I associate with certain sounds or types of sounds and things like that. So he said, well, and he knew about my background in visual art, so he said, why don't you return to it? Yeah. And so I'm really glad I did, because it then tied everything together. Sure. And as you know, there are pieces in here that include sound. Or this past week we did a violin performance of a piece I wrote. So being back in this place now feels like a great unifying place for me. Yeah. So then, were you not happy making music? Was that because I would imagine that if you're in a field that you're obviously very good at, what was it that made you say, okay, now for sure I'm going to just kind of, we'll still incorporate it in the art as you do, as in your visual arts, but was there a deciding factor that made you say, okay, now I'm strictly going to focus on the visual aspect of my arts? Well, I think in film, and as in a lot of music too, it becomes very collaborative. Sure. And I love that. It works in a very different, it functions in a different way. Yeah. But I've come to realize that a lot of what I do is about following inquiries. Okay. And exploring certain questions. Mm-hmm. And those are things that are harder to do in a larger collaborative way. Okay. Especially one that has a lot of funding and other things. Yeah. So from a visual sense, or even like with the copper sculpture here and with sound, there are collaborations that happen, like in the violin performance, for example. But the process itself, or at least my part of the process, is it's more allowing of me to to pursue those inquiries.
Sure.
So I guess it's about finding the form, right? In which these things, how your brain works and what form fits that. The most.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that. All right. So I wrote down as I was on your website and reading your bio and things like that. There was a paragraph here that stood out, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about right now. It says here, my work is grounded in the position of questioning, or rather the questioning of position in relation to frames and systems, while acknowledging the inevitable necessity for frame and form to carry intent and meaning. Okay, so when I read that, the first thing that goes to my head, right, as from the kindergarten to the 12th grade, I went to Catholic school, okay? And you know, you said being able to have these questions and questioning things is sort of, you know, what brought you back there. And it's funny how, you know, why that quote kind of, you know, spoke a lot to me was because, you know, I went to Catholic school and you learn about the Bible, you learn about all these things, and you're taught not really to question you know, anything that's in there, but you should believe it, right? Or you have to believe it, right? I mean, that's, you know, it's a matter of faith. And as I got older, I've gotten very interested in like the historical aspects of the Bible, right? Who wrote it, right? Like, why should I believe all of these things? And, you know, the more I researched it, the more questions that I had. And that I'm still, you know, going through today. And when I read that, you know, that part on your website, I thought that's absolutely wonderful. So my question is, you know, as I kind of tie it into religion, how you're not supposed to really question anything, like you're taught not to question God. When it comes to some of your, you know, visual art pieces, is it that you make them with the intent of having a specific meaning? Or is it that, you know, kind of like from my religious perspective, is the viewer will look at it and maybe interpret the meaning the way that they see fit, sort of questioning, like kind of like I had a sort of existential crisis, questioning what I believe in. You know what I mean? So are they open to interpretation, or do you go in making these pieces, let's say like this piece, for instance, with a certain meaning and how do I say it? A certain focus on something that you wanted to convey in the artwork?
No, I definitely think it's open to, and my interest in, or the way I see how art and specifically the art object, which could be visual as we see here, but it also could be sound, right? Or like a violin performance. But it's always for me about the triangulation between not so much even me, the artist, but the concept and ideas that hopefully I'm exploring, or the questions, and the object itself and the spectator, or I love Claire Bishop's term, a spectator, right? Because every spectator is an actor and an active player in the completion of the work, or a version of the work. And that's partly why in most of my work I'm always hovering in between figuration and abstraction, primarily leaning towards abstraction, or like even in that piece over there, which is probably the one with the most figurative thing. It's fun. It's wonderful to me that most people come up and don't see the figure until I mention the bound over there. You know, and I think that's great. You know, I think, because I've come to feel that the questioning, which comes from curiosity, is such a fundamental human thing, and it's something to relate to what you mentioned about your bringing. You know, it's something that I was fortunate to have bounced around a lot of different school systems in Thailand, but there some of the ones that, like some of the more Thai schools that I went to, were very much also about not questioning. And then back in my day, you would literally get physically beaten for questioning. You know, so which is horrifying to me, because it's abusive, but it's also hindering one of the most precious things, which is just the curiosity, which oftentimes doesn't get brought back. In adult life.
Sure.
And thankfully, somehow, through my mother was a teacher, and so she always encouraged the questioning, which also got her in trouble sometimes. So I'm very thankful for that. And so all of my work follows that line you read. Of the questioning position, or from a position of questioning. And realizing that there isn't really an answer, or there's really not at least a simple answer. Like in that I mentioned about how acknowledging that framing is a part of how we perceive and understand, right? And that has to do with myth and narrative too. We create our myths and narratives in order to understand our perceptions of the world. But oftentimes, if we don't question those myths and narratives, they can concretize. And then they become ideology, or oftentimes leads to that, which is also partly why a lot of the material, one of my main materials I love to work with is concrete. Because for me, concrete work emblem is a great symbol for this process of being malleable at the beginning in the formation, but then over time it hardens like ideas if we don't question it.
That's right.
But it's also kind of it's sort of funny and ironic to me a little bit too, the use of concrete, because every piece that has concrete that is presented, like here in a gallery, has already hardened, right? Unless I'm doing a performance piece where it's real time. So it's interesting to me that the form that it then takes and is presented is actually the form that I'm intentionally trying to question.
Oh, I see.
But that's part of the irony.
Really. And what I love about the concept of using the concrete, and how you said it's like ideas. And once it's hardened, once you've had a certain mindset of, framing things in a certain way, that's it. Sometimes you're stuck.
Sometimes you're stuck, but that's why it's so important to break those down, I think. And so often what I do with concrete is I do something and then I rip things out or chisel into it or remold things onto it and then chisel it out again. Because it's that constant process of, you could say, construction, deconstruction, right? Or like in here, where you see imprints of what had been embedded in the concrete that has now been removed. And again, we can metaphorically go back to these things we're discussing of, when we question, for example, your upbringing or my upbringing, it doesn't remove it. It's still there. But it's that act of, and a lot of those things in childhood are embedded very deeply. Things like trauma and other things like that. It's very hard to completely get rid of it. But I think acknowledging it, and that's why I like the traces that they leave. Because those traces are left in us.
That's true. That's very true. And they show themselves.
They show themselves, and I think maybe not the only thing we can do, but one of the main things we could do is reframing that. Right. And like history as well. And realizing that history. I read something very, very interesting recently about how which relates to what you were saying about how in pre-Christian times. Time was thought of as more cyclic, and history was recorded more as simply events. Today we sow the seeds. 10 days later we reap something or whatever. And it wasn't there wasn't as much of a necessity to connect those dots into a narrative. Now I'm sure we told stories in some form, but of course. But with Christianity, or at least in the West, and this eschatology, this notion of moving towards something, a linear movement, seemed to play a somewhat large role in our perception. And our narrative building. But that goes to the one of the things I question the most is our need for sense making or meaning making.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is interesting in what you brought up earlier about the audience and the spectator and being open to that, because everyone brings themselves to it, and their own. Because ultimately, we're trapped within our own perceptions, right? Our own perceptions are a frame that we can't really break out of.
Absolutely.
And so I love, to me, these pieces or these works are just sort of conduits in that triangulation. And in many ways, you'll get to learn more about the spectator, hearing about how they're perceiving something, almost more than the object itself.
Absolutely.
Which is exciting to me, because the triangulation hopefully then leads to things like dialogue. Which is so important to be able to carry.
I mean, like we sort of did the night that we met.
Exactly. Yes.
This is fantastic. It's so funny that I had a million questions when you were just talking. You keep like making these go off in my head. But the thing that I was thinking about, how you're talking about the imprints, how it never goes away. Like here, it's always part of you, and about ancient times, things being cyclical. I mean, if you just look at the pyramids, right? I mean, everything was tied to the stars,
Right.
It was very, very important. And, take it back to me things I'm learning now about the Bible, and it's traces of these older stories from older religions that kind of, I don't want to say they copied it, but it was just the narrative of the people at that time, right? Like, how do you explain how the world is here? How do you explain how, And it's just fantastic that, kind of like in this piece right here, and just throughout history that, no matter what, happens a year, 2 years from now, what happened today or 10 years ago, it's always going to be a part of you. Okay. All right. So another question that I had was, first, was this sort of abstract style always the first kind of art style that you partook in? Were you doing something earlier? Like, I mean, when you're younger, it's a little different, right? There's, I don't want to say there's a limitation to what you can create, but there's a limitation to what as far as how old you are. So was it always this sort of thing where you always just kind of, imagination run wild? No,
it began very figurative for me. And because it began a lot too with an exploration of trauma, which is still something I do in both the larger scale, as in like cultural or historical traumas, but also personal. And and through those explorations, I started to think about figures that are trapped within systems, right? So in other words, I started very literally. There was a body, the body was trapped in a space or a frame of some sort. But then eventually through the process of working through that, I started to boil it down further. And so eventually it became, the frame became more geometric. And of different kinds of geometric shapes, because for me it related to how, and I could be wrong here, but I don't often see right angles in nature. Right? So for me, geometry is something, it's a form, a structure, a framing of a way of, understanding and perceiving the world, and like the pyramids you mentioned, but and so I started to think about instead of bodies being energy, as in movement. And then it became about movement that was being trapped by geometric shapes. And that started to get more abstract, obviously, right? And And that's kind of where I slowly the figurative overtness dissipated into other things.
Okay.
You know,
sure.
like energy that's trapped and being broken out, but then being retrapped by other things. You know,
sure.
because then you can start to apply that to other concepts, right? And it's not only it can be then be more open to interpretation, perhaps.
Sure. Okay.
You know, and yeah, because that's sort of how I like to. It seems to be how I think. You know, like this. Like earlier on, I was more thinking about things like, okay, we must break the cycle of myths or myths.
Yeah.
Right. Because I was thinking a lot about how myths are often used in very propagandistic ways, for example, and in many countries, you know, and are leveraged in manipulative ways especially for things like nationalism and things like that. That's okay. Well, we must break that down. But then I started to realize, again, trying to keep moving further back, realizing, well, even the breaking of myth is in itself part of myth. And it feeds into itself, right? And so hence going to ideas like ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, and realizing, you know, that most things are quite cyclic and feed into itself. But that doesn't mean we stop. You know, same thing with the questioning. We're always going to be retrapped by other frames, but we still have to keep questioning and keep shifting the frame. You know, hopefully in a better direction.
And
not worse.
Because I mean,
it can also be yes.
It could get very, you know, it's funny. I dabble in conspiracy theories. I mean, I like to know what people are saying, pretty much. Right? Most of them are kind of nonsense, but some of them have, you know, a little bit of truth to them. Okay, but I mean, in today's society, with social media being so fast and you know everyone connecting, you know, it's speed of light, right? That new myths have begun to spring. I mean, as far as, you know, American society goes, right? You've got, gosh, I don't even want to mention the names of these groups and stuff, but you've got people willing to believe, and modern day myth really is what they are, to sort of strengthen what they already believe. Right. You know, it's not like how you're talking about framing things in a different way. It should be for the better, but sometimes these things get framed in such a hurtful and I mean, you know, just a terrible way. Right. That, you know, the cycle of whether it's a good or a bad thing, that obviously being a bad thing, that it's, you know, it's never going to go away. And I kind of, you know, get what you're saying about destroying these myths, but I mean, it's kind of human nature. Like, you know, like we talked about this already, how to make something make sense. Right. Yeah. And though, you know, myths are often so connected with signs and symbols, right? And turning things into symbols. And or as Barth talked about, you know, signifiers and signifieds. And I spent some time being quite depressed about the fact that we're all trapped within these webs and networks of signs that we cannot get out of, because everything is a sign. And especially what you were mentioning, like social media, right? Everything has become, but it already always was, you know? And so I was quite stuck for a long time of what do we do? But it was discovering other things Barth had said that helped free me, and realizing that, as he put it, you know, that escaping it is futile. Like there's no point. But what we can do is try to turn the things that are signified in ways that perhaps we disagree with or we don't think are good, into signifiers of something else that is hopefully better. Right. And so it's just pushing the chain along. You know, but hopefully in a positive direction. Absolutely. Okay. I want to know how would you compare creating music, scoring movies, to creating something like this? Is it, because I would imagine that there's a certain kind of freedom in both. Now, it might be a little different making music for someone else where, they want it to sound like this. They want it, a certain tone, or it's got to be dark for, a certain reason. Is it the same kind of freedom that you have when you're just thinking of a concept for a visual piece and just kind of laying it all out there?
Yeah, it's quite similar. Because I work with a number of different mediums, right? And even these visual works are very mixed media. And I usually let the inquiries lead.
Okay.
And the materials I use are related to what I'm exploring.
Okay. Sure.
There. But it's similar in that it always starts in the inquiry stage and the research. Okay. So I do love reading. I try to read around things. I try to create my own webs of various texts and ideas and different points of views that slowly things start to spark and things start to create, come together. Yeah. And then the materials reflect those processes. Okay. Which is why, for example, I work with a lot of material that is very transformative. Yeah. Like cheesecloth. Sure. Which I then harden with shellac or rope or things like that. So, and sound too. For example, the cyclic thing was something that sound became an almost better material for me to work with because it's ever changing. Sure. I can, with that particular piece, it was also about myth making, and it was taking field recordings from nature, and then on the one side of the sounds, and then manipulating them into these ghostly voices. Sure. Yeah. In other words, that's why it's called Let the Wind Speak. Okay. And it speaks to how we've always done that. We've always turned things around us into gods or symbols of some sort. And we still do that, like you said, with modern myths. But what I wanted to do was make it less clear, which came before the chicken or the egg, right? Sure. And so the piece is all intermingled. Okay. The source and the result are not separated. Okay. Sure. Well, okay. But also in that particular case, the sound work was an attempt to break the frame musically. Okay. Because the frame, I realized in music, is the start and end point of the piece. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then everything more or less remains the same. Sure. But so the way to break that would then be to have a piece that never started or ended. Okay. And so that's what this piece was it loops in on itself infinitely, but nothing ever really repeats. Sure. Because there is 21 layers of randomness. Yeah. So it's ever different, ever moving. Yeah. Which again is to me like history. History repeats itself, but it's never exactly the same. Yeah. Right? It's always shifting in some way. Yeah. Which also then led for me to the violin piece. Okay. Which was essentially a similar exploration. Yeah. But with a collaboration with other people. Yeah. So the piece starts and ends with the same note. And then it elongates into a shadow. Okay. Within and then comes back down. So the piece technically loops within into itself. Okay. And also the piece, there's two parts to the piece. The first part is just the violin on her own, in this case Anna. And then the second part is taking the recording of the first part and morphing it into these ghosts, like I did with the sound. Sure. and playing it back with herself, then but repeating the same performance or the same piece. Yeah. And so the idea for me is how trauma, often historical trauma too, dissipates into these indistinguishable forms that are indistinguishable from their original starting point. Yeah. And they form a kind of veil through which we perceive personally or culturally. And when traumas kind of get resurrected, like in the second movement, we have to react. But how much of that reaction is repeating what we've already done?
Oh, sure.
Hence why the piece is technically the same.
Yeah.
But, oh God.
Okay. There we go. Wow. Man, that's interesting. I'm so upset I missed that.
We have recordings.
Yes, and here's why I will play the piece. All right.
Yes.
So I want to talk about this show here.
Yeah. Can we pause for just a second?
Go for it.
Okay, all
right. Yes, I want to talk about the show here. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about your idea for the show. Now, did you make every piece here for the show? Was it sort of a concept sort of thing, or did you already have some pieces made and you maybe worked around those pieces?
No, I mean, I was just following my inquiries, and so most of the pieces were already made when Emily and Zach, the curators, came by. We discussed the possibility of a show. Yeah. Interestingly, the sound piece, this copper sculpture sound piece, was the last piece I finished.
Oh, really?
Which for me was a way of completing a lot of these works. But they all they're all kind of interwoven anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
And even the title of the show, DANDELYE, is a title of an album I had done last year, which also was the title of a book that I was trying to write. Yeah. So thematically they're interconnected.
Okay, interesting. Hold on, I want to talk about this book for a second.
Yes.
How far along are you with it? Maybe I don't want to know what it's about because I don't want to spoil anything if you were going to finish. But
I don't think I'm going to finish it. So.
That was my question. Okay.
But no, I worked on it for 5 years. Yeah. There was over 34 drafts. Okay. It changed a lot in that time. Sure. At one point, it became a book of poetry book, basically, a narrative poem. Okay. And it was an important part for me creatively of questioning my own relationship with my upbringing, where I grew up, identity, and those sorts of things. And part of one of the most interesting parts of that journey for me that is when I started to work with Thai poetic forms, specifically one called the Klong, which has a structure that is unbalanced. Okay. So the line lengths are long, short, long, short, long, short, short, long, short, and then the rhymes are mostly internal within that. And so there's a sort of, because of that structure, there's a sort of lapping, lilting, or you could also say lopsided structure. The rhyme scheme makes it quite musical and lilting. But I started to realize that was something that was very connected to the character that I was writing with. Okay. The idea of the book was that there were two parts. Okay. And the two parts were two characters with the same name, but you realize at a certain point that they're two different people.
Oh, okay.
And that. Then they're separated by time. Okay. But that was a lot to do also with the question, the notion of naming and how we name things and how that changes perception. Yeah. Of ourselves too. Because I know many people close to me whose names were changed, for various reasons. I myself went through a name change. Oh, sorry, I hit the mic. Anyway, while I myself had at one point earlier on changed my name to a more Western name. Sure. Because it was harder for friends of mine that weren't Thai to pronounce it, and so things like that. So naming is is a big part of, and you could go further into themes that are here in the show. Things like the words we used for things like trauma. Yeah, you know, and how like a lot of therapy is to do with reframing or renaming those. Yeah, sure. Right. And so that, you know, anyway, so, but the poetic structures, and so both parts were written in two different poetic forms. Okay. Because I felt like, for example, the Cloam was more related to the way I felt this particular character thought. Okay. Whereas I used another one called Gallant Bat, which is more equidistant or more equal in line length. Okay. More like iambic pentameter in English. Sure. And that made more sense with that other character. Mm. And I started to think about how that got me to thinking about how we all have our own rhythms. Yeah. And again, that ties into the copper sculpture there, because I started to realize that each, you know, because the sound that's coming out of this copper sculpture is coming from these exciters that are attached to the bottom, and they essentially vibrate any surface that it's on into a speaker. Yeah. So there are no actual speakers in that, and the sound is sort of vibrating off the copper itself. And because of that, and because of the shape of the sculpture, it has its unique resonances that are obviously imperfect, but like all of us, we have our own rhythms and our own resonance space nodes. And so that was something I started to work with, and I'm continuing now to work with that. And so it became an exploration of bodies and image and sound, you know, and that ties back into film for me, right? Because film is ultimately synchronized image and sound, right? Yeah. And the way I see it is that because that medium is quite related to how we perceive reality, right? It is one of the reasons why film has become such a powerful and dangerous tool for propaganda. Oh yeah, right? Because if we're not careful to question what we're seeing, even in a documentary, who is framing this and why? And if there's score, which is not always great, I think, in documentaries, what are you doing with that? Right? Because music is often used as emotional manipulation. Right? And so these are all, you know, wonderful tools, and they're all tools like all these other tools to create illusions. Yeah. The question is to what end? Yeah. And how responsible are you with your usage of those materials? Right. Yeah. But and so anyway, coming back to this, I guess I realized I've always been fascinated by this relationship between image and sound. Yeah. And especially because of how I feel about the dangers of the film medium and the potential ways it can be leveraged, and has clearly been leveraged in history. Oh yeah. I've always been curious to find a way to deconstruct that, or reconstruct it in a way that hopefully can, in that triangulation we talked about, hopefully can provide another way to see that synchronized thing. So for example, with this, it is a synchronized, in a way, it's a synchronized image and sound. Yeah. But it's clearly not a film, but it's working with those materials. Yeah. So I don't remember what the question was now.
Oh, geez. I was talking the concept for the show. And
and the book too. Yes.
Okay. And it's a great way to tie in, I mean, just a bunch of your artistic skills. I mean, you've got the visual and the audio aspect to it too. Now, when you had started getting back into art, were you always thinking about combining the two somehow? Oh, really? So how did that idea come about then?
That's a great question. No, I when I came back, I was just thinking of working with with visual materials, because I grew up around a lot of construction sites, and so I loved playing with concrete, and,
sure,
cement, wood, there's these materials for construction. How it tied into it actually is because one of my really great friends, Robin Tisman, who's a wonderful art historian, she and I became friends a while ago, and she's been very encouraging and supportive, but also as a way of, as we all have with different people, she provided me with, I guess, a great vantage point.
Okay.
And she always said to me that she could see the musicality in what I was working on, or she could see the movement that I was bringing from my musical training. And at that time, early on, I said, no, I think I'm leaving that behind, And she said, well, okay, but I see it. You're bringing something that's different, or that your training in music is feeding into this.
Sure.
We kept talking about it over many months, and these kept coming up, and eventually I started to realize that sound is actually it started because I started working with light projection.
Oh, okay, sure.
And so I started doing pieces where the physical surface was just half of the work. Okay. And the other half was light, something that was projected onto it. Okay. And I like that because I like the ephemerality of that. I like the fact that also the spectator can interrupt it by obscuring part of the projection and casting their own shadow on the work. And it played a lot with interpretation and things like this. And that was exciting for me to start to... we'll pause a second.
Another one.
But that was exciting for me to start to extend beyond the physical object into physicality that's more ephemeral. Yeah. Okay. And I started to get really fascinated by the notion that half the work is left. If you turn that off, it's gone. Yeah. Yeah. And so then that helped be the jumping off point for me back into, well, then I could also play with sound in a similar way. For example, right now, in this space right now, the copper sculpture is silent. For this interview. Sure. So half of the work is actually gone.
That's right. Yeah. I didn't think about that.
but and then the same thing with like the violin performance is we have recordings, but realizing that the recordings are just traces of a moment in time and place. Yeah. And going back to the use of sound, that became an interesting thing for me, of a way of layering stratas of time and space. Okay. Because as you layer recordings, you're layering traces of different times and spaces, and you're correlating that into one moment. Okay. Oh, so it is kind of a way of time travel.
Yeah, absolutely.
All at the same time.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay, that's very deep. I dig that. Okay, so the violin piece. Okay, so you wrote the piece that the musician played here.
Yes.
Okay, so was that always a part of that concept when you were creating that?
You mean a part of this exhibition? Yeah. Yes and no. Okay. It did begin as that, as many things don't for me. Sure. Many things just start as experiments, and then months or years or whatever later, something sparks and it connects. And that piece originally I had started to sketch out about a year ago. Okay. And it was about, like a lot of things for me, it was about exploring the shadow of that trauma casts across a lifetime or generations. Yeah. So I knew I wanted to start with one note and extend the shadow. Yeah. But that was it. Yeah. And I didn't know what else to do with it. But then, thinking about this and how, I could extend, for example, this work, because this work began as a contemplation of the Ukraine war. Okay. And Anna, who's the violinist, and I had performed at a benefit concert together at the break of the war last year. Oh, okay. So this was always on my mind. I've always wanted to write a piece for Anna that wasn't for other things. Okay. Yeah. But nothing had. I sketched all these different things over the years, but nothing felt right. Yeah. But then this one felt right, and because of the things I was already thinking about, and having already worked on that sound sculpture and playing with the loop, I realized, oh well, I could play with that idea, but with a live person. Sure. Oh yeah. And so that's how I was able to then complete the cycle. Yeah, yeah. And then Chen, who performed the ghosts, that was another way of completing it for me, because it was because in a version of the recording I had done the ghost myself, which is fine. Yeah, yeah. But I then started to think about how could we do this in a more interesting way in a space with an audience, and as opposed to just simply playing back something. Yeah. And that's when the idea, and actually it was Emily who had suggested, why don't we do 2 performances? Yeah. Because it's a 9-minute piece. Yeah. It's not that short, but it's not a whole concert. And then I thought, oh, well, if we're going to do that, why don't I actually build in the past into the second movement? Okay. Yeah. Because then also the audience in the space is engaged in that duet of past and present with us and with, And then I thought that's when I started to talk to Chen, who had programmed the sound work already. And she's both of them have been friends of mine for a very long time. Okay. And so a lot of these conversations and dialogues about histories and legacies of violence and things like this have been things we've talked about over many years. Sure. And so that made the collaboration a lot easier, because I fully trust them, and they trust me, and so the work was a dialogue. Yeah. Yeah. And the score or the piece that I wrote, I intentionally made it incredibly, I guess, vague. Okay. In the sense for two ways. One is that I took out all the bars. Okay. Which being a musician yourself, you would know. Yeah. And that relates to the subtitle of this exhibition, Beneath This River's Tempo Time We Walk. And for me, it's this note. Speaks to how ultimately the largest frame we can't break out of is time, or our perception of time. Sure. But despite that, we walk. We continue, and tempo time I use intentionally for the notion of man-made structures of time. Okay. Right? Like, why are there, 24 hours in a day? Why not 13? Sure. Why not 55? These are, I'm sure there are historical reasonings, but these are clearly, a man-made structure. We're both wearing watches. We're structuring ourselves in order to interact with each other. And so from a musical sense, I wanted to get rid of that because I wanted her, Anna, to be able to interpret her time on her own. Okay. Now, I know we already do that, but I wanted to go further, especially because as a pianist myself, a musician myself, I realized that when you get rid of the bar lines, you perceive differently. Yeah. Because you can only worry about the relationship between this current note length and the next note length. Yeah. You're not counting the beats, right? You don't, and you have no sense of any of that. And so it forces you to be more in the present, in that moment. And then it also gets rid of the notion of, oh, we're at 120 BPM the whole time, for example. You know, so a half note she might play, you know, 3 pages later will not have any relation necessarily to this, you know. And we even did that. There was a section in the second page, the piece is 3 pages long, which is kind of interesting. I didn't plan this, but it's interesting that it's become its own triptych.
Oh, really, and I mean,
which is this too. You know, there's a couple of lines in the second page where I had imagined something, and as we were playing it, I realized, no, this needs to be much more. We both realized that, and I said, can you really kind of go crazy with that? And can we speed up time? And so suddenly 2 lines are incredibly sped up, but she's also massaging that. And so that was one of the things. The other thing is, unlike a lot of traditional music, I wrote no dynamics, no expression markings or anything. It was just dots on a bunch of lines. Because again, I wanted that to be the process of discovery.
By the musician.
By her and us through the rehearsal.
Sure.
You know, and I said very, very little other than thematically that I was thinking of these woven histories. That's the name of the piece, and these legacies of violence. And so we discussed Ukraine and things like this, and it was very moving to me that at the performance on Saturday, one of the things she brought up before the second performance was she showed a couple things to the audience, and she played this one little phrase, which is at the top of the 3rd page, and she said that to her, that little phrase reminded her of her childhood town in the Ukraine where she grew up, which was green and beautiful and is now rubble. And it was really, obviously very emotional and heartbreaking, and something that you know, was so beautiful to me because I certainly didn't know that. I didn't write it thinking that. But it's part of that handing over. You know, and the dialogue through and what she was able to bring. To it.
Because it would allow her to. Because there's no time, there's no expressions to.
Right.
Even with rehearsals, though, it's kind of how she feels.
Exactly. And you know, depending on her surroundings, meaning maybe today, this morning, there's different news, or she's feeling a certain way. You know, it could be quite different. And that's part of the work is the notion of everything being in flux. You know, so the only reasoning you know, behind the text, so to speak. Well, A is to have a kind of map, but also B, it could speak to also the notion that we're all how much are we repeating texts in our lives? You know, how much are we repeating those things from our childhood? You know, and how much are we moving away from that? You know,
absolutely. Wow, I got real deep for a second, guys. But fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be a little bit out of order. I want to talk about your early life a little bit. So you were always, I'm sure you know, you were gifted with the arts, right? That's kind of the path that your life took you. How was that accepted by family and friends, right? Because being an artist, you know, knowing that it's going to be a tough road, even as a musical artist, right? It's not, there are lots of musicians, there's lots of artists, right? It's got to be something that you truly, truly believe in if you were going to pursue it as a professional career. One was that, even if you could take music lessons from the age of 5 to into your 20s, doesn't mean you want to be a musician. Was that always sort of the goal, and was that accepted by everyone? That no matter what sort of art that you were doing, that you were going to be an artist?
Well, my mom was very supportive, always. You know, she nurtured me a lot
Yeah.
in the arts and gave, you know, and got me a lot of, you know, art materials.
Sure.
And, you know, you know, brought me to different artists to kind of learn from, and
Yeah.
you know, all that. So she was always very supportive of
Yeah.
that. You know, I don't know that I was. I mean, I always wanted to be so many different things.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, obviously all in the arts,
Sure.
but yeah. I mean, for me, you know, the grounding thing that propels me is the inquiries.
Yeah.
And to me, it has to start there. You know, because it's often less about self-expression and more about inquiry.
Yeah.
And that I need to do, you know, daily to be able to feel connected
Sure.
to the world. Because without that, things can spiral quite quickly for me. So for me, it's sort of it's like, I guess, you know, like meditation or whatever, or yoga or whatever one does to feel grounded. And that's yeah. So that's more of. So the art objects become more traces of those inquiries,
Sure.
And it's less of an expression.
Okay.
Sorry, that kind of deviated a lot.
No, that's good. No, I got it. No, that's good answer.
But no, you know, I was quite supported.
Okay.
I was I'm very thankful of that, because there are many friends I have in Thailand who aren't.
Yeah.
You know, from the family unit, I was quite supportive. From a larger societal thing, not necessarily.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of the usual things of how can you make money and these sorts of things. Absolutely. You know, but you know, there's a growing. There was an arts community, much more in music than in the arts, than in the visual arts. In Thailand. So I was part of a number of those things, and you know, when you're part of that, like an orchestra, an opera company, or something, there's a camaraderie, which is fun. You know, growing up, it's nice. It's the visual artist world is a little more solitary, which I love.
Sure.
Now, you know, but
when you get a little older, it's a little
I mean, I liked it growing up too.
Sure.
But I also enjoy, you know, I love theater, for example, and I was in a few plays terribly. I'm a very, very terrible actor. So I shouldn't go there. But I do love theater, you know. And I do like the camaraderie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of that.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, when you get older, the concept of time is a little different.
Yes.
You know? So even though, you know, like, you could like being around, you know, other people's company, you do value that time that you have for yourself, or even if it's just time to create, you know, because and the creating is often it's a dialogue. You know, like, you know, one of my favorite quotes about art is from Louise Bourgeois, and she said something like, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but something like, you know, all art is half emotion, half thought. And that's always been very true for me. A lot of the works I start, even as much as I'm talking about inquiry and research, a lot of the works I start are very sort of intuitive and visceral. But I'm also reading and doing other things. But to me, it has to become, it has to have been dissipated, it has to sink in enough to me so that when I'm working, I'm not translating. You know, I'm not saying, oh, I like this philosophical concept, let me translate it. I see.
You know, because then it's it needs to be intuitive, but you know, you are what you eat or feed or whatever, right? That whatever the saying is. So I always feel I need to be ingesting things and researching and shifting my points of views, but letting that sink in. So that when I'm working, especially when I start a piece, it's always very intuitive. But then obviously through the course of time, I'm questioning and things like this. And then I start to some of those things can maybe start to apply more consciously. But it has to be that dance.
So would you say then when you're coming up with a concept for a piece, or even just starting out, is it, I know it's kind of a delicate balance of internal expression as opposed to environmental expression. And I mean, the two are sort of connected in a way. But for you personally, is it more of a internal expression of how you were feeling or how you have felt in the past, or just the remembrance of an emotion that you felt before? Or is it more so incorporated with the environment that you're in and, you know, the things that you're consuming around you?
That's interesting. It depends. I mean, I think I would say now it's more incorporating with what's around me.
Sure.
You know, of course, we're always digging from our past.
Of course.
But I'm happy that and this I think is often with most people's early works. You know, my earlier works, especially those figurative ones I mentioned, for example, were much more directly mining those memories, right? Or whatever, right? But then, and it depends what one's trajectory is. For me, I've become, I love I'm very comfortable in the, I like this sort of macro view thing, you know, where I like to be able to, I like the notion that hopefully that each piece can operate on both those levels. Sure. Like it could be more about larger questions or histories or things like that, but it can also be, there's also a very personal thing behind it.
Of course,
Like the Bound piece, for example, where it is about the questioning of how, it was one of my most overt of questioning of how mythology frames and can distort or constrict our viewpoints. Right? But there's also a very personal story for me behind it, which is actually that the boy figure that's in the painting was a boy that I saw when I was 10 in Thailand who had drowned. So he was the first experience I had with death.
Sure.
And it was very interesting because I wasn't scared. It was not like a horror ghost story or anything. It was very calm and peaceful, but of course haunting because I knew he was no longer alive. But also because we were the same age. So anyway, that's an example of how, to me, it's not important whether most people would know that. It could be interesting for sure, but I hope that it could operate on another level. You know. So it is both. It is both.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Because I get the sense of it. I mean, I get. Like this piece, right? I think I told you. When I walked into this gallery and I saw it, I kind of stopped in my tracks, right? I like to say, like, I told you how I love Mark Bradford and his work.
Yes, so do I. Yeah.
And I got sort of the same feeling when I first saw your work and his work. I like to say about his work, it's overwhelming in a good way. It's overwhelming that it's a lot to take in.
Right.
But the good thing about it is there's so much to take in. You can really take your time, just figuring out what it means to you or how it makes you feel or, the emotions that, it gets out of you.
Right.
So I could, immediately feel, I mean, it's a great piece.
Thank you.
Feel the emotional sort of piece of you that you laid down on the canvas. Yeah, it's great. I absolutely love it.
Well, it's very humbling to hear that. Thank you.
Of course,
Because Mark Bradford is somebody I greatly respect.
Fantastic artist, fantastic story.
Yeah.
But that's the same sort of emotional reaction that I had. It's the same thing. You. Yeah, and that's what good art does. I think that whether it be a very figurative piece or something that's very lifelike or abstract, it's supposed to pull some kind of emotion out of you.
Sure. Right? Of course.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of art, that you will see it a different way than I see it, or another person that sees it, and And that's why I love the arts, man. That's what makes it so beautiful. Yeah?
Well, and it's and I think, going back to your question of or your point of film versus visual art, for example, I realize it's also to do with the openness. Because film, I mean, there are many kinds of film. There are many great films that are non-narrative that I love. Yeah. But the majority of films are narrative, and the tricky thing with anything that's narrative is I guess the narrative is the figuration. Yeah. And that can, depending on how you treat it, be very constricting or not. Yeah. And it can be very sort of dictatorial on what you're supposed to be taking away from this and how. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Now, obviously, there are great filmmakers that do narrative films that don't do that. Sure. Yeah. But there is also a lot of that. Yeah. Whereas I think in visual art, and also music on its own. Sure. Is music on its own, of course, is purely abstract. And so by definition, it's, which is, I think, why, at least it's my little theory as to why songs are predominantly more popular at the moment, just in general. Yeah. And throughout time. Yeah. Because part of it is that it's the abstraction that's framed by figuration, and the figuration is language. Okay. It's music, the abstraction music is framed by language and often is narrative. Yeah. Right? But because of its relationship to the abstraction, it can often create a beautiful juxtaposition or whatever it is, But it's that combination. Film has that potential too, and there are great films that do that. Yeah. I think in visual art, especially because we've lived through abstract expressionism and other forms of art, there's in a way it's I guess it can be instinctively more open. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, I like how you compared the two with movies or certain films and with art. I want to talk about films for a second, how it can be, when something, a genre or even an actor or someone that's popular. Okay, I'm going to take it back to the 80s, okay? Yeah. So I grew up in the 90s, and I remember just a ton of action movies, right? Like watching it as a kid, and how at that point in time, for the climate of films that people just wanted to just see people get beat up, right? So you have a bunch of different actors sort of playing the same character, right? Like, and it's, it's not the same, movie studio doing it. Everyone's doing sort of the same thing, right? Art, sometimes it trends like that. I guess the buyers kind of dictate the market, and if a certain artist is getting collected, sometimes you see other maybe not so well-known artists or artists on the come up sort of incorporate that style into their work. How it can be, the popularity of something can influence creators to kind of make the same thing. Oh yeah. Okay, so now for you, and it's a little bit different, but do you ever feel the pressure to, and I kind of figured that you won't, but the pressure to maybe incorporate what's popular or what you think people enjoy, and maybe it's something that you stay away from, but do you think that that's a problem within the art world, that a lot of, and I mostly see it with younger artists, and not a lot. It's not, there's very much individuals out there, but I do see what's kind of hot right now, and maybe let me do this to sort of, prop myself up a little bit. Maybe someone will see this because, everyone's looking at the same kind of things. Right. Was that ever an issue for you personally to conform what you're doing to, to make it so that people can enjoy it because you think it's what they want to enjoy? In visual art? Yes. No. Okay. Yeah, that's good. But I recognize that we all have to live. Yeah. And I'm fortunate that my things that pay the bills are other things.
Sure.
And that's been very important for me, because then it's given me the freedom to pursue these interests and inquiries.
Sure.
And I mean, I'm very much, I am, of course, I do think a lot about perception and how things, who am I don't want to say speaking to, but how am I how am I sharing?
Okay.
And how am I triangulating, hopefully a dialogue?
Yeah.
But that's not, obviously that's not the same as the pandering thing.
Sure.
But but the other thing too is, depending on the scale that you're trying to work in. I mean, I realize these are somewhat big, but compared to, for example, a film production, it's nothing in terms of the resources, the financial, so I get why in an industry the resources are so heavy, and it requires so much, there is more constriction.
That's true.
Even, for example, in music, for example, like again, depending on what kind of, like, for example, I love chamber music. I would love to work more with that, but unless you're getting a lot of commissions, it's very, very expensive to put something like that together.
It's a lot of moving bodies.
It's a lot of moving bodies. It's a lot of resources. It's a lot of rehearsals. It's a lot of all these other things. So there are practicalities, obviously, which I understand, and that's one of the things I love. Also, is with the visual art world for me, is that it and of course, like incorporating sound and things. It's primarily quite self-contained. With the exception of one or two people. So it essentially allows one to be, for me, to be more free.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would love to work more. I would love to experiment. I mean, I love experimenting. So I would love to experiment with, for example, film. I don't know how. But I've realized that wherever I go, I have to remain grounded. And I feel like I finally have now in these things we've been talking about, these inquiries, and realizing that the materiality is it's important, but it's not the first consideration, or the technicality of something. It needs to begin with what the impulse is, what the questions are.
Okay. Now I understand that sometimes the art is ever evolving, right? Something you make 2 years from now might not look anything like this.
Right.
So how would you describe the evolution, or probably the constant evolution of what you're creating? And, oh, geez, hold on. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh my gosh, now I lost my question. Okay, how would you describe? Okay, this is where I was going. Okay, just kind of the linear path you're taking. I mean, it's it's still ongoing. And do you feel that maybe you found sort of, not your voice, but kind of found a comfortable place where you feel like, okay, when it's time to create, like there's no hindrance anywhere. I'm just ready to go.
Well, it's Zach talked about this, and he and I have talked about this, and in terms of building vocabulary. And yes, I do think that I've found a kind of vocabulary. And a lot of that vocabulary is material, like concrete or ash, or even in sound. I know. For example, the violin piece is essentially vaguely atonal. And it was only very recently that I kind of understood why I'm drawn to that and how it relates to all my other visual work. and I realized that it goes back to the quote you read, which is the questioning of positioning.
Sure.
And I realized that, well, tonality is a grounding, right? You're in C major or whatever, and it frames the work, obviously.
Yeah.
But because I'm interested in constantly changing that, the vaguely atonal thing works well within that, because there might be, and I'm not writing in strict atonal systems like 12 tone or anything like that, and I have done that, but it's more, it goes back to the intuitive thing, and so there could be certain intervals that seem vaguely tonal, but then it shifts. So it's sort of like a kaleidoscope. I use that as an example of finding vocabularies, but hopefully they'll grow and change. A lot of my, or not, I don't know. But for example, if I have to pick one favorite artist that whose work has influenced me the most, it would be Samuel Beckett. Because, well, many things, but his works have remained with me very strongly, and the way he dealt with subjects. Also, I love Duchamp. So so there are a number. Cornelia Parker is great. I like being. I forgot the question now. What was the question? The vocabulary.
Yes.
Do I feel that I feel like I've found a grounding of a kind of vocabulary? Yes. Okay. I think, but I'm also careful to try for myself to think, hoping that these are more grounded in something, in ideas. Even if I may not have recognized it at the time, like the atonal thing I just mentioned. Because to me, if it can be grounded in some kind of idea or concept that is part of my inquiries, it becomes more grounded. Because aesthetics change very quickly. And I myself have done that in the past, where I've, especially in film, where on one score I would do this sweeping Hollywood epic, and then the next one is some kind of like Nine Inch Nails sounding thing, and so I've bounced around a lot too, and that can be fun, just technically, but it's hard to maintain some kind of. You mentioned linear, trajectory, but also then questioning that too, like is how linear is it? Because there are things now, like clearly the violin piece and others, that have sort of, or things that I had done years ago that have been woven in now. So it is sort of this constant sort of overlapping of webs.
No, I did that. All right. I don't want to take up too much here. I could talk forever. So,
as can I.
So, all right, let me get to some of these ending questions here. Okay. Being here in LA, for so long, and I'm sure you've been around the art scene, for a while, and there's, so many galleries here and lots of fantastic artists here in Los Angeles. How would you describe? Okay, well, let me start off by saying this. Okay, so I've been, around art for a long time. My dad was an artist. We used to go to museums and stuff like that all the time. And I noticed a change in, I guess, the art scene down here. I want to say maybe, 3-4 years ago. I want to say around the time of COVID, right? When people were inside and at home, and this is when I found so many artists. This is when I sort of finally said, okay, this idea for the show, I'm just going to do it right now, because I've seen so many artists. I've noticed a change in, social media changed everything,
right?
It's much more easy for people to see your work, or to even reach out and find other artists around you. So the change that I've noticed is that there's more collaborations. There's more of a willingness with the younger generation of artists to help each other, to plan things out together. I go to different shows and I see other artists, going to different artist shows, and usually that it's the younger crowd. I mean, it really is. So how would you describe the state of the scene here as far as art goes? This is a multi-part question. Have you ever experienced any, I would maybe say a little bit earlier in your career, difficulties trying to kind of break in to be seen? And do you think that it's, in a good place now? Personally, I think it's in a good place. It could be in a better place, but I think art feels more accessible now to just the everyday man, as opposed to what you thought of someone going to an art gallery, 20 years ago.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So how would you describe the state of art here, and do you think it's in a good place?
Well, I mean, I'm actually newer to the art world.
That's right.
Here. Yeah. I've found it to be incredibly welcoming.
Yeah.
More so than other scenes that I've been around.
Yeah. Music is
what?
I said music's a tough one.
It can't. Well, and then in the case of music too, it can be very segregated.
Sure.
Which is a whole other thing. But no, I found the art world here to be the art scene here to be very, very open.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I love this because it's what I've always longed for is to be able to have discussions like what we're having here, and with other artists about all these different forms and mediums, and not being just locked in one thing.
Sure.
And because that, to me, the cross-pollination of ideas and mediums and forms is so important. Yeah. And what you mentioned, the collaboration. Yeah. And I found that the most here in the arts.
Yeah, really.
So I'm very thankful to have become part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the support is really wonderful.
Yeah.
There are many artist friends that I love and support their work, and they've supported mine. And I think what's exciting about that is that there's a connection beyond beyond this sort of aesthetic surface. Sure. And there are deeper inquiries, I keep saying, but deeper questions, deeper concerns that we all seem to share. Sure. And it's exciting.
Yeah, fantastic.
In terms of breaking in, or being tough, I've been fortunate. Yeah. I haven't, but again, I think it's the time too. Sure. Like you mentioned.
Yeah. I think everything. Yeah.
Because for example, I can tell a story in relation to film 15 years ago when I came here and I was told by some film people basically that I should, and at that point, unfortunately, it was on me too, because I was in a confused space with my own identity, cultural identity, and things like this. And so I was coming up with different names that were not my Thai name. And I was reaffirmed that by certain film people that said, "Oh, you should not even mention that you're Thai,
really,
because no one would hire you." Wow. And at the time, I thought, "Oh, okay, great." Sure. All right, okay, so, and it, things have changed a lot.
Oh yes, a whole lot
since then.
Oh yeah.
So, but also, you can also experience that on the flip side, where you then are boxed in on the opposite side, where you need to now then become a representative of your entire culture. Absolutely. Right.
Absolutely.
Which is also problematic on the other side.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. It really is.
But I think that there's I'm seeing a nice sort of medium.
Okay. It's
in the arts.
Nice. Yeah, it really is. It's that's why I love going to these shows. I was at a show downtown on Saturday.
Which show?
It was a part of this what do you call it? Artist in residency program.
Oh, okay.
So it was a showcase of the 3 artists that are residents. And so it was an artist that I had met and interviewed, and I actually met him at a gallery. It wasn't even his show. We just started talking. And then when I get there, I see another artist that he's friends with that I interviewed. I didn't know that they knew each other or anything like that. So it's nice to see people just to come and support, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Art's important, I think it's part of what makes us human, it's just being able to express in different ways, it's
part of that thing of it's how we process. Yeah. Right? It's how we process our times.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what I love about reading or seeing art from very different times and or very different cultures of our current time. Is you see, or like films. I love a lot of foreign films, for example, because it's exciting to see not just a different story from a different place, but a different point of view. And that's what I think all the arts do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay. For you, what would be your dream place to go by yourself just to create? Where would you go?
That's a really interesting question. I'd love to travel more. But I can't quite. I don't think I could say a physical place. I mean like a city or a country. But I would say in the mountains.
Okay. All right. Why is that?
I grew up on the side of a mountain too.
Okay, sure. Okay.
And I love mountains.
Yeah.
I love the ocean too, but I really like mountains. I think I love being within the trees. I love I go up to Angeles Crest here all the time. And the wood, the branches in the sculpture outside there is from Angeles Crest. Okay. It's from a dead tree.
Yeah. All right.
Which is why I called it There Once Was a Tree. Well, one of the reasons. Anyway, I love going up there because it's quiet. It's a way of not being distracted by the. I also love I love the interaction and I love social media, like you said, because I've met some amazing artists all over the world whose work I love and who support me and things like that. So. It is great, but in terms of finding a dream place to just be quiet. I think.
Okay. Just the quiet. It's funny too because here in LA, right? It's just a busy place, right?
It's a very busy place.
Lots of things going on.
Yeah.
But so for me, growing up in the born and raised here.
Yeah.
My favorite place still to this day is Griffith Park. Because
Griffith Park.
Oh,
Griffith Park. I love Griffith Park.
Boy.
Yeah.
You can go in the middle of Los Angeles. You could go high enough to hear absolutely nothing. You know what I mean? It's absolutely beautiful. So it's growing up in the city has made me long for the mountains, right? Like I love it.
Yeah.
Anyone that's from LA has at least gone one winter to Lake Arrowhead.
Oh yeah,
Big Bear.
I love Big Bear. Yeah.
So I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. My final question. Oh, and hold on. Before I ask that question, where's the best place for people to find you, to reach out to you, to view your work, or see what you got coming up next?
On my Instagram, I'm. I guess we'll.
I'm gonna put it there.
The thing, right? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. Instagram.
I'm most active on there.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Okay. So my final question that I love to ask.
Yes.
If you could give advice to an up-and-coming artist, maybe an artist not so sure of themselves, what advice would you give them? And also, is there a piece of advice, or is there something that you wish you knew when you started, being serious about creating visual art?
I think the advice would be to focus on what is behind the art.
Okay.
And behind the technique. Okay. And this relates to your second question of something I wish I knew. I wish that Yes, I wish that there was less emphasis or on the technical and more on the thinking.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Or at least I should say that's as
it's as important.
important. And that's something that would be my advice is to because the technical stuff we can all learn to different degrees, obviously, but those are like in music, we can, so much is available now on YouTube and things to learn these technical things. I think the important thing, or to me the more important thing, is what's behind those techniques.
Okay. No, I like that. Yeah. Why are you doing it?
I think and whatever that is for you is if it's an expression, why are you expressing that? And why are you expressing that in the form that you're doing?
Sure.
And I guess to that extent you could explore other things. To me that's what really helped when I finally came back to visual art, is I'd gone to all these other things, and that helped me realize what it is about visual art that I couldn't do elsewhere.
Sure.
But then in turn it helped me realize what about music or sound I couldn't do in visual art.
Sure.
Right. So I think going deeper into what is it you're really interested in? In taking apart the scaffolding a bit, so that you could, because I think if you could see behind it and how the machinery works, because it's all systems and machinery, right? I mean, language is its own system and machinery. If you can realize how it works, then you can build it into something that is hopefully more yours. For example, that's something for 10 years that I couldn't really do in music and film. I was on the surface sort of taking bits and bobs of things and collaging it. Which is great. I mean, I love collage, and a lot of this stuff is a kind of collage. But I needed to be able to go. I wished I was able to go deeper earlier. And I wish that in general is more emphasized in various ways. And also maybe valued too. Because then that goes back to your question earlier about, or your point earlier about following trends. And that's a whole nother thing too of how the machinery works and how do you then that's a whole nother thing.
That is.
but no, I guess to summarize that, I would say, I guess it's just if it's going to be, to be very concise, I would say stay curious.
Yes.
About everything.
Absolutely. Never stop asking questions. Absolutely. All right, Saun. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
Thank you.
All right.